And so the focus of tonight's talk is, like the cat in the background, Jenny, is um, horse racing terminology. And so a quick intro for you guys. I am newer to the world of horse racing. I don't come from a family that was involved with it. Growing up and living in New England, there weren't many opportunities. So as we've been building the stable, I have been learning a lot along the way. Lauren, on the other hand, is a font of knowledge here. So we're going to have perfect roles. I'm going to ask questions. She's going to answer them. Now, I will admit, I do know the answers to a number of these now, but if you'd quizzed me about 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known at least half of these terms. So without further ado, I'm going to mute everybody who is on this call. And if you have questions, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little button that says chat, and you can put questions there. Lauren and I are going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the floor. But if while we're reviewing the terminology, you have questions, just type into the chat box and either Lauren or I will answer it. So let me share my screen, which is always the best part of this, making sure it all works. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about are blinkers. Once I get my screen changed. All right. So Lauren, let's talk about blinkers.
All right, so essentially blinkers are one of the more commonly used racing equipment in racing all over the world, actually. So they're typically used to help horses with some sort of a concentration problem so that the horse can focus. So now this first set of blinkers that's photoed here, the photo is of here, is it's a set of cheater blinkers. So there's essentially no cup used. That's like right around the horse's eye. I don't know if you can see that. That's that. Yeah, that red, curvy bit. That's the cup of the blinkers. And so these are basically, there's no cup really used with the cheater blinkers. It's more used to signal to the horse before the race that it's, showtime or game time. Then if you want to move to the next slide. Yeah, so these three, the one on the far right is a set of French cup blinkers. So these are the most commonly used in the United States, and these are what most of our Wasabi horses are racing in. And then the blue ones down near the bottom, those are a full cup blinkers. So those usually have a hole cut out in the cup so that the horse can see any rivals coming up from behind. And then the other smaller photo, so this is called an extension cup. So these aren't used very often. I have, however, seen Lacey Gaudet use it at least once at Laurel Park before. So this is almost always just used on one eye to keep a horse from lugging in or lugging out. And that's essentially, when a horse would, drift to the right or to the left, like while running down the stretch. So those are the main blinkers. And if you want to move to the next slide. Yeah, so essentially this is a diagram so that we can see what the horse's vision is actually, normally. So these blinkers are actually restricting most of this vision along, I'm sorry. The horses are prey animals, so their eyes are on the sides of their heads. So they can see everywhere but directly in front of and directly behind them. So essentially, yeah, the blinkers are going to be used to prevent them from looking behind them to a certain degree. I mean, the full cup obviously is going to be much more restrictive than the cheater blinkers. So that's just so that you guys can see what the horse's range of vision normally is and how the blinkers would affect that.
Lauren, before we go on to the next slide, I know we had a couple new people join us. So welcome to our webinar. If you have questions, I've muted all of you just so we don't have to deal with background noise. If you have a question while we're going through the slides, at the bottom of Zoom, there's a chat button. If you type a question, either Lauren or I will read it and we'll get it answered while we're covering what were covering at that time. So I'm sorry, Lauren, if you have anything else on blinkers before we move on, feel free.
Did you have anything on the hoods, or did we?
We do. They are further down, but I can scroll down to them.
Okay, yeah. Why don't we just go through that? Just
sure.
So
there you go.
Yeah. So I just wanted to talk about hoods now. So the one on the let me talk about the one on the left first. So that's actually Beholder, who is schooling in a hood. So hoods are a lot like blinkers, except that they don't have the eye cups. And hoods are typically, you can see that it actually covers the ears here. So there's extra padding in those ears essentially to muffle the sound. So Beholder never actually ran in a hood. I think it's much more common in Japan. I've never seen a horse race in a hood in the United States. I don't know if it's even legal. Yeah, essentially hoods are used to, muffle sound and, for nervous horses and that kind of thing. So the photo on the right is one that a lot of people may not even have even seen before. So that is actually a pacifier hood. So it's also used to keep horses calm. It's more often used in other countries, but it can also, I've seen it used with one cup like this. The cup is essentially made of mesh, so the horse can see through it, but it's not going to be, figures aren't necessarily going to be quite as distinctive. But they can also be used to help protect the horse's eyes. Overseas, they use them a lot on synthetic tracks so that the synthetic track isn't being kicked up into the horse's eyes. I've also seen Keith DeSormo use one of these with one cup on a horse that was racing out in California at one point. And I believe that case, the horse had an eye injury. And so he didn't want any dirt being kicked up into the horse's eye. So that's hoods. And then if you wanted to go back to cheek pieces.
Sure, yeah.
So again, cheek pieces are not as often used in the US, although, you do see them occasionally. You would see them a lot more often over in Europe. But essentially, these are function similarly to blinkers in that they restrict the horse's vision, but they're not nearly as restrictive as blinkers can be. And they're often easier to put on and take off.
And
this is just part of the bridle.
And Lauren, a question for you. Is any of it like for comfort of the horse, choosing between a cheek piece and a blinker, or is it actual functionality?
I think it's mostly actual functionality, but I wouldn't be surprised if, it comes down to, especially based on the trainer, if it comes down to the physical comfort for the horse. Mostly I've seen just European trainers or, trainers from Europe use these in the US though.
Okay, great. Moving on, our next topic is the tongue tie, which I think I've seen fairly frequently.
Yeah, so sometimes this can be used basically to keep the horse's tongue within its mouth, and sometimes it's used to essentially keep the tongue in one place so that the horse cannot get their tongue over the bit to evade the bit. So normally the bit actually sits on top of the horse's tongue, but they can pull it back and over to essentially prevent the bit from being as useful for the rider. Tongue ties can also be used to keep the horse's tongue in place so that the horse's airway stays open, and it's easier for them to breathe. I think there have actually been studies that have shown that tongue ties are almost universally a positive on racehorses. And then if you want to go to the shadow roll, this is actually just a photo of Zenyatta. So she, John Sheriffs is very well known for using a shadow roll on almost all of his horses. Bob Baffert uses a shadow roll on almost all of his horses. And I know that John Sadler does as well. So they're called shadow rolls because they're essentially meant to prevent horses from quote unquote jumping shadows. sometimes the horse's vision is not all that great, because their eyes are on the sides of their head. So sometimes they will see a shadow on the ground and think that it's actually something in their way and that they have to actually jump to get over it. And so this is essentially to keep their eyes focused more upright, so that they're not focusing on things on the ground in front of them. That's not really something that racehorses typically need to worry about, with a flat track. It can also help them to lower their heads a little bit because they need to lower their heads in order to see lower on the ground, if that makes sense. Let's see. If you want to go down to
Lauren, because you always store this sort of data, and do any of our horses run with the shadow roll? Because off the top of my head, I cannot think of any, but I didn't know if maybe you pay better attention than I do.
I don't recall any that do race with a shadow roll.
And TK, if we are wrong, feel free to type into chat. Don't unmute yourself,
yes,
but
please do. Yeah, I can't think of any that have raced in the shadow roll, but I wouldn't be surprised if.
Yeah.
It's usually a pretty non-restrictive piece of gear. It's
sure.
It can pretty universally be used on every horse without many issues. Okay, TK said they used it with Field Prat a few times.
All right, thank you, TK. All right. Next up, well, we already did hood, so we're going to hop over that one. We're going to talk about bandages.
Yeah, so bandages. So this is actually a photo of Participate that I took at the park when she was walking up to the paddock. So she has a set of bandages on her hind legs here. Bandages can be used either on the hind legs, or on all four legs, or I believe also just on the front legs. But usually they're just used on the back legs or all four legs. So essentially these are used to help support the horse's legs and prevent injury during a race. I have heard of trainers using them with claiming horses as almost a bit of a bluff, so that maybe other trainers think that maybe the horse has an injury of some kind, so they may not want to claim them. I'm not sure how well that works, but it's definitely a strategy that some trainers use in claiming races.
Yeah, I know, and if I'm talking out of turn, I'm sure TK will correct me, but I know that when we are looking to claim horses, if a horse is bandaged, it definitely is a reason that we would consider not to claim it, just because you can't fully see the animal, so. But I will pause a second before we go slides, see if he's typing and correcting me, or if it stays silent. I was right on that one.
Yeah, I'll just
there you go.
Jump in real quick on it. There's actually rules that bandages have to get removed before they get into the paddock. Now, not always well enforced, but that is something that does. It's supposed to, so that you can actually get a good look at a horse's legs pre-race, and pre-claiming for that matter. But it depends on the type of bandages and what's being wrapped, of what it would disqualify us for a claim or not. But and there's a lot of gamesmanship too, where people will wrap bandages and then take them off at the very last minute to make it look like there's a problem with the horse because they don't want the horse claimed.
That's exactly what Lauren said.
Yeah. So
some of that I actually did not know. So you learn something new every day.
Yeah, you'll see many paddocks in the country. There'll actually be signs that remind trainers that they have to remove bandages 10 minutes before a race, 15 minutes before a race. You'll see that sometimes in certain paddocks to remind, and they'll usually like a fine amount, like $100 for the first offense or $200 for the first offense for not doing it.
All right. Thank you, TK. All right. I think we'll move on. So reason why some of these horses might be wearing bandages, we'll move into grabbing a quarter.
So this is actually a photo of California Chrome, actually after the Belmont, I believe. I believe this was actually another horse that stepped on the back of his heel. But horses can grab the quarter just by themselves, you know, but if they break too quickly out of the starting gate or they take a funny stride out of the starting gate, their one of their back hooves can actually take a chunk out of one of their front hooves, essentially by, you know, in an overstep. So this is actually just a photo of what grabbing a quarter can look like.
And I have to confess, that was one of those terms that until Lauren and I made this deck, I had not even heard that. So I suppose it's good that I don't know that, but yes. So good learning experience here. This one I do know, so go ahead, Lauren.
Yep, so this is actually a photo of Highland Reel, who is very well known for being washed out before races. Now this was a very common, you know, event for him. So if you can see all the sweat lathered up on his neck right there where, you know, his chest strap is rubbing it. That lather can also appear with the horse's back legs, behind the horse's between the horse's rear legs. So typically that means that, you know, maybe the horse is nervous in the paddock before the race. I mean, in most scenarios, it depends a lot on the horse as to whether that's a good or a bad thing. With Highland Reel, that would be expected. If he wasn't washed out before the race, you might be kind of concerned. But yeah, with most horses, you know, it's unusual for them to appear washed out before a race, particularly if the temperature is, you know, in the 70s or cooler.
But I suppose it's no different than human athletes that some come into their, you know, sport they participate in more revved up, right, and sweatier than other athletes. So, you know.
That's exactly it.
All right. Something we've been seeing lately, schooling.
Yeah, so this is actually a photo of a horse schooling at Laurel. So the groom here, you can see, has a bib that says schooling on it. So essentially, the horses are, you know, young horses in particular, are taken to the paddock, usually the paddock. It can also be the starting gate, to be desensitized essentially to the paddock and the whole pre-race process. So sometimes you'll see, you know, a horse that isn't actually entered in a race that's walking around in the paddock beforehand. You know, they may not have any tack on, but all the other horses do, and you know, often the groom will have a bib that, you know, horses schooling, so that people can distinguish between that horse and the other horses actually in the race. So older horses can school as well. It can often be to prepare them for major races where there might be a lot of noise, like the Breeders' Cup, or it can even be used to get them used to a new track. For example, one of our horses, Fear the Turtle, actually shipped down to Laurel Park at one point to school in the paddock because he had never shipped to race outside of Charlestown before. So that was just a new experience for him, and it was good for him to get that kind of a learning experience before he actually had to do it on race day. So again, you can also school a horse in the starting gate, but you know, I can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the gate card.
All right, perfect. All righty, the look of eagles.
Yeah, so the look of eagles is something that a lot of people talk about with regards to a lot of the great race horses. So this is always a photo that I think of. So this is a photo of Man of War, who raced back in the, you know, early 1920s. I consider him to be the greatest, you know, thoroughbred to ever run. But he essentially would look through you. You know, it's this kind of imperious, intelligent look that often signifies that, you know, a horse feels like they're better than, you know, other horses or even people. I actually had a bit from Walter Farley, who had actually met Man of War at one point when he was you know, long retired, but he said they were deep, intelligent eyes and very bright. More often than not, however, he seemed not to know that we were there at all. His gaze fixed and far away, so intent that I could have sworn he was watching something far beyond our vision. So again, that's kind of described as the look of eagles. It can be a little bit hard to see if you don't, if you're still new to horses. But anyway, so that's, people say that that's the mark of a great racehorse, though, is, you know, when they have the look of eagles.
It's regal, that's for sure. And, you know, it's, yeah, quite the look.
Yes.
Alrighty, now we're going to break down the racetrack. So I don't know if you want to just start with a track and then I'll throw out terms if you don't cover them, or.
Yes. So basically, this is actually Belmont Park. Let's see. So let me go with the generic parts of the track. So the finish line, you know, is, you know, on that side, that is called the home stretch. In a route race, horses will usually break from the home stretch and then go around once before, you know, finish it, you know, around the entire track. So 2 turns is typically a route race. So the first turn on the right is called the clubhouse turn. So that's usually where the clubhouse of the track is located. That's sort of why it's called the clubhouse turn. The far side of the track is called the backstretch. Oftentimes the horses are actually stabled on the other side of the backstretch towards there, which is, you know, so you might hear people talk about like, oh, over on the backstretch, but not with regards to a race. That's typically what they're talking about, is the stabling area. They might also talk about backstretch workers, like trainers and grooms and jockeys, that kind of thing. And then the turn on the far left, that is called the far turn. You might also hear track announcers say they're turning for home. So those are typically the main parts of the track. Yeah, so typically sprints, yeah, actually, well, yeah, typically sprints are around 1 turn.
So like they would start right where I'm holding the cursor for a sprint race.
Yeah. So that, and so typically sprint races are 7 furlongs or less. So that's 7/8 of a mile or shorter. A route race is usually defined as a mile or longer, but a 1 turn mile, which is what you can have at Belmont Park and at Laurel, that is essentially known as an elongated sprint. The 1 turn mile is kind of a hybrid distance, so to speak. It's not a true route and it's not a true sprint. Let me think. What shoots. So up in the top right-hand corner of the track, it's an extension of the backstretch. So essentially, a chute is used to use so that horses can start on a straightaway instead of the turn. You can also see a couple of minor chutes on the inside track on the turf. But typically what the chute is referring to is an extension of either the home stretch or the back stretch.
And you know, I know we race in all sorts of places, but we've done a lot of racing in Maryland. So when they run at Laurel, this is a similar sort of track, but when they run at Timonium, and I know we don't have a picture of it, it's a much smaller track because
Yes.
we've some of the longer races there take 3 turns, correct?
Yes, they do. And that's the same with Charlestown as well. So the Charlestown Classic, which is 1 1/8 miles, is actually 3 turns, which is, you know, those tracks are known as bull rings, just because they're so small. The standard size for a racetrack is about 1 mile in the United States. Laurel Park is 1 1/8 miles, and Belmont Park is 1.5 miles. So that's why they can do a 1 turn mile.
All right. All right, we'll move on to our final slide before we get into some fun videos.
All right, so gate cards. All horses need a gate card before they can officially enter for a race. So essentially, this is like a license so that the stewards and the gate crew know that the horse can behave properly while loading into, standing in the starting gate, and breaking from the gate. And at a lot of tracks, horses also need official names with the jockey club before they can get their official gate card. So what we actually have here in this photo is Start from Scratch's official gate card.
Yeah, and the horses we have there, I'm not sure. It's one of the two that we had up in New York in 2016, 2017. We had a couple claimers that we, I believe, co-owned at that point, right when Stables was very young. And so that's one of our horses actually schooling at the gate back in the early days.
All right.
And as a follow-up, because I am learning more and more, so all of our 2-year-olds, have worked on or have earned their, are working on getting their gate cards. But if you're a horse, and because you might be able to see the text on Scratch's gate card, if you're a horse that traditionally runs without blinkers but start running with blinkers, I do believe you have to get a new gate card because you've changed your gear. Is that correct, Lauren?
Yes, that. As far as I know, that is the case, at least in Maryland. I think it does depend on the jurisdiction, though.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We have more topics to cover, but Lauren is going to be sharing videos with us. So
Yes.
rather than trying to negotiate between the two of our laptops.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
Excellent. So this is actually a video of shared belief schooling. So this was, before the Santa Anita Handicap. So as you can see, this is the saddling area at Santa Anita, where they typically tack up the horses. And so you can see that they're walking him through the saddling area just to make sure that he's very well accustomed with it. And so it's not, he was an older horse by this time. It's not that he hadn't done this before. It's just, that it's always good refresher practice. And as you can see, when they move outside to the actual outdoor paddock where, the jockey's going to leg up, he's pretty high spirited. And so essentially this is a way to, again, keep making sure that he's used to this whole process. Again, he's very high spirited in this video. This is always one that I think of when I think of horses schooling. So again, he's acting like a young 2-year-old here. It's just more because he's in high spirits. You would definitely say that he is on his toes in this video. So yeah, so again, older horses can definitely school as well. It's not just something for 2-year-olds and young horses. Then I think we wanted to talk about lead changes next.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I have 2 videos actually to show you with regards to this. So this is actually, a dressage horse, and this horse is just at the canter, but the canter and the gallop are similar gaits for the horse in that they both have leads. And a lead is essentially, think of like a human skipping. So typically if you're skipping in a circle, you're going, say a circle where you are turning to the right. You're going to be leading with your right foot, just because it's easier. It keeps you more balanced when you're moving on that circle. It's essentially the same with horses, whether they're at the canter or at the gallop. So again, this is at the canter, but I thought that it was easier to show you a bit of a slower gait so that it was more pronounced. So I'll show you. So the horse is on its right lead right here, and then right there. I don't know if you saw that. He switched. So it's a bit of a skip right there. I'll show you one more time. So right lead, left lead. So again, that's just to kind of show you an exaggeration of what is going on at the gallop. So this is actually a video of Diversify in the Whitney. So this is a slowed down version, and he makes that lead change right there. I'm going to show it to you again. This is a slowed down version. So right now he's on his right lead. You can see his right leg is a little bit further forward. When, you know, let's see. And then right there, he switches leads. Again, it can be really hard for people to see. Michelle, are you able to see this?
I am, and honestly, you know what? It's something when we're at the track that it's nearly impossible for me to see as everyone else is screaming, yeah, he switched his lead. But even though it's difficult to see with you slowing it down and pointing it out, I think it's visible. And this is as someone who does not have a trained eye. So I think that's a well done video.
Yeah, so again, I know what changing leads is, you know, like both at the canter and the gallop. I even have a hard time seeing it, you know, live during races, just because it's not something that I'm usually paying attention to. It's something that I usually see if it's really pronounced, or, you know, maybe the horse changes leads late in a race like this one, or usually, yeah, usually if the horse changes leads late in a race, or if I'm watching it at a replay.
Yeah, and I think your description with the skipping for me mentally helped. But Ken has a question, and that's he wants to know if they shorten a stride to make the switch.
No, not with racing. So with leads to I wanted to mention. So the race horses are typically trained to be on their right leads on the home stretch and then the back stretch. And then they're trained to be on that to swap to their left lead when they go into the turns. I mean, again, obviously this is, you know, when, you know, they're running in the United States where they're all running counterclockwise. But that's typically the way horses are trained. So when they come to the top of the stretch and they turn for home, you can usually see them swapping leads at that point. I do have another video where I can show you an example of that. Yeah, does that help you answer your question, Ken? So I mean, typically when you're swapping leads, you know, just in normal equitation, you don't start out with flying lead changes. You start out by taking the horse back to a trot and then asking for the canter again with the opposite lead. But racehorses don't typically do that. You just usually, they usually, as far as I understand, either they get a cue with the whip, or from what I understand, the jockey will shift the weight subtly to the other stirrup so that the horse understands that it's time to change leads. But I'm not a jockey, so I don't know the specific.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's TK. You'll also see them roll their wrists with the reins. They'll actually take the reins and sort of make a big circle with them, and they'll be asking the horse to change its lead by circling the reins. You'll see them do that. It's almost like they're doing the breaststroke. You'll see a jockey do that in the home stretch, and that's asking the horse to change a lead.
Thanks.
All right. Again, like if anybody still doesn't understand lead changes, you know, I'm happy to go over that later with you guys. But so the next one I believe is
high knee. Yep, high knee action.
Yep. So this is actually I had to use my old boy Sistron for this one because he's definitely has high knee action. So he's actually the horse that's number 2 right here. If you can see this, his knee actually comes up so that his foreleg is parallel actually to the ground. Typically horses don't lift their knees up quite that high. Yeah, so he's a great example of a horse with higher knee action. And some people say that, you know, horses with higher knee action are better on the turf or, you know, softer ground, that kind of thing. I think it really just depends on the horse. Sistron has obviously been able to do both dirt and turf. But let me show you in the stretch too, so that you can see it a little bit. Again, compared to the other horses, they just don't lift their knees quite as high as he does when they're at a full gallop. So again, like his knees get almost, you know, completely horizontal, you know, parallel to the ground. Whereas the other horses, it's known for being a less efficient stride movement. It's not an ideal form of movement, but obviously Sistron has done decently enough on the track that it hasn't hurt him too badly. Does anybody else have any questions about high knee action? No.
Looks like we're all good.
Okay.
The
Actually,
next,
I wanted to show you just at the top of the stretch. He does swap leads as well. All right, so he's on his left lead right now, and then right there he swaps leads. Again, it's much more subtle here, but I just wanted to give you another example real quick. Is inside lead, left lead, or right lead, sorry. All right. What was the next item you wanted to talk about?
we have rank horse.
Yeah, so actually, so this was just a quick grab I did of War of Will in the Kentucky Derby. So I think actually, let me just refresh this. So they're coming around this turn here. War of Will is this horse in the back here. You can see right there he's throwing his head up. I said this way, horse. Michelle.
I'm sorry, I lost you there. I heard nothing of what you said.
Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that I was discussing rank horses, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so again, I just wanted to go back a little bit. So Wardwell right here is throwing his head up. So typically, you know, that can be because the horse is running up the heels of another horse, and the jockey is having to hold them back a little bit. A rank horse is one that's fighting the jockey. And that's not really something that you want to see, because the horse is expending energy fighting the rider when really they should be putting all their energy into running. So that's never something that I like to see. That, you know, a horse is doing is fighting the rider and being rank. Let's see, and then again, this is a little bit later on in the video. Let's see. Choose this one. So this was where Will also had to check, you know, and pull up a little bit in this race when maximum security cut in front of him. So you can usually see this. The jockey will sort of stand up a little bit more in the stirrups to kind of put the brakes on the horse, essentially. So here you can see that right there, the jockey is having to lean back and basically check the horse. And that was part of the reason for the Kentucky Derby controversy, essentially. Is that, you know, he forced, you know, maximum security forced Will theoretically to check hard enough that he wants to play something. So there's that. Did you want to go over any other items, or I know we're in 40
Yeah,
minutes.
so I was going to say, why don't we stop here?
Okay.
And we'll take some time to take questions from the crowd, because it's 7:40, so we have about 20 minutes left. So I think what I'm going to do, I think I may just unmute everybody. And if you have questions, oh, people are going away. If anybody has a question, just shout it. Well, I don't know why you aren't all unmuted. I unmuted all of you. Maybe some of you have selected to mute yourselves. I'm guessing you have. So if you have a question, just shout it out. And if it's more than one of you at once, you can negotiate who will go first. So do we have any questions for me, Lauren, or we'll even let TK answer if we need? No, we have no questions.
No questions?
Marie looks like she's talking.
Oh, I can't see her on my screen. That's interesting.
But I don't hear her.
Yeah, I don't even see her, which is interesting.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Marie. If you'd like to try typing, that would also probably help as well.
She's only on the phone too.
Oh no.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well,
please feel free to shoot Michelle or I a message over Slack, and we would be more than happy.
Yeah, and Marie, if you're not a member of the stable, so you're not on Slack, you can just email me, Michelle at Wasabi Stables, and I'm Michelle with 1 L, and I will definitely get an answer out to you because we can't hear you at this point. But if you're a club member, put it on Slack in the community section, or if not, you can just email me directly. So if no one else has questions, we got Joe said that it's so far so good, well explained. Lauren, do you want to share a couple more videos? Wrap it up early. It's your call.
Sure, I can share a couple more videos.
All right. The next item I had was middle move. Oh, unless we have someone talking. Yeah.
I thought somebody might be talking too, but all right. So let's see. Middle move. So this is, I have sort of two examples of this. I'll also show you this one as an example of what you would call a green horse. So this is actually a video of Run Happy's debut. So he is actually the number 4 horse, rushing up on on the rail here. So he essentially breaks last in this race, and typically a horse that makes a move towards the end of the backstretch, towards the middle or end of the backstretch like this, that's referred to as a middle move. And a middle move being it's not at the start of the race, it's not at the end of the race. A move like this at the end of a race, might be like Run Happy would then be a closer. But in this instance, it's just that he was very green, he broke very poorly, and then he rushes up here, makes a middle move. Again, he's the number 4 right here. And he just blasts right on past the field. And let's see. And so another reason why I would say he's very green in this race is because he completely blows the turn here. You can see he ends up being floated very wide. And he's all over the place in the stretch. He's, bobbing and weaving all over the place. Again, see here, he ducks out again. The blinker with the 1 cup that I mentioned before, that would actually be something that, if they had kept blinkers on him, they might want to, consider that for this horse. Of course, they took the blinkers off, and, he went on to do amazing things in his career. So that's an example of a middle move and a green horse. Abel Tasman in the Ogden Phipps also made a pretty well-known move here. So there's Mike Smith on her. So again, she went towards the back of the pack, and then towards the middle of the backstretch, she just kind of moves up past the speed horses here. And again, this is not typically when horses make their run. So again, this is why this is called a middle move. It's not a typical run from a racehorse. So she goes on to win this race. you know, like Run Happy. It's not something that's always successful, but in these two instances, it was.
So Ken has a question, Lauren. He wants to know, how does a trainer determine which running style fits a horse, early, middle, or closer?
I think a lot of it just depends on the horse itself. Often, I mean, sometimes you can tell because the horse is maybe particularly bad or slow out of the starting gate. So you might figure, well, this horse is probably going to have to be a closer. Horses that are poor out of the starting gate don't make very good front runners. Sistron, you know, as you saw in the Kona Gold, he breaks on top, you know, at the front of the race, at the top of the race, on the backstretch, and he stays in front. So that's what's referred to as a front runner. A closer would be a horse more like Zenyatta, who, you know, her Breeders' Cup Classic win, she comes from, you know, dead last to storm past everyone in the stretch and win by a nose. So, you know, those are examples of, you know, front runners and closers. I mean, there are horses like that have tactical speed. That's probably more horse like American Pharaoh. Maybe not the perfect example, but you know, so he could either run on the lead or just off the lead. It just kind of depended on the pace scenario and how that developed. So, you know, or a horse like Arrogate. Arrogate won, you know, both on the lead in the Travers, and he also won when he was coming from well off the pace in the Dubai World Cup, after he broke very poorly. So I would consider him as another horse that has tactical speed. But I think a lot of it just kind of depends on the horse, and often I think the jockey will determine the horse's early running style more than the trainer will. I mean, do you have anything else to add to that, TK, or does that about cover it?
Yeah, I would. The only thing I would add is that I think you alluded to it pretty well, which is the horse actually determines what their style is in 90% of the cases, right? It's you know, a horse can be have a lot of really good top end speed, but isn't very fast. So, I mean, or you have the opposite. We'll take a horse like one of ours, oh gosh, my mind went blank. He's running Friday. Flat Out Mine. Flat Out Mine is a rocket ship for the first 3 furlongs. he's going to get to the lead. He's going to be part of the lead. And if he doesn't get the lead, he's going to be angry and and probably not run very well. So he's a front runner, and his style is dictated by that. So, and then you got horses that's running. We have a horse running coin operated. Coin operated actually outworks Sudden Brilliance, one of our other horses who has done extremely well, but she's not quick of foot. So we're hoping the more we stretch her out, the more successful she's going to be. So the horse itself and their own physical makeup usually make up the style.
Thanks. Lauren, I thought if you want, we can just do one more topic and then we'll call it a night. And that was, we talked about a hand ride. Did you have a video for hand ride?
Yes.
All right.
So this is actually Rachel Alexandra's Kentucky Oaks. Let's see if it'll reload for me. Let me just skip ahead a little bit. This is Rachel Alexander with the white silks. Essentially, a hand ride is one in which the jockey never really uses the whip. And I mean, you can actually see here, Calvin Burrell, who's writing Rachel Alexander here, he looks behind him a couple of times. That usually means that the jockey has a lot of horse left, and they're just trying to see, you know, how much more they have to ask the horse, you know, for them to win comfortably. So again, see here, you can see he never actually goes to the whip, and that was him just looking behind him to see how much he's going to win by. But yeah, so that's essentially what you would call a hand ride here. And she goes on to win by, I think it was 20 lengths or something like that.
Wow.
So that's what I would call a hand ride.
Well, thank you. That it sounds, you know, it's self-explanatory, I guess, but you overthink these things, so it's good to have video and explanation. So before we say goodnight, does anybody have any last-minute questions? Again, I will unmute all of you, and though some of you doesn't seem to be unmuting me for you, so maybe you've set your own mute. So if you have a question, now or never is now, basically. All right. Well, I want to first of all thank Lauren. Lauren, in full. Oh, wait. Under the wire. Ken said another good hand ride was Beholder in the Pacific Classic when Trevor Denman said he just shakes the reins at her. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Thank you, Ken.
One of my all-time favorites. I should have considered using that one as my example.
But I want to thank Lauren. When I first came to her with this idea, Lauren, I'm going to out you here. She was like, oh no, I'm not going to be very good at this. And I think you've done a fabulous job. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who took the time tonight. I will get this uploaded onto YouTube no later than tomorrow, because right now I'm going to go get dinner. So I hope everyone has a great night, and thanks for joining us.